Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into one topic that most hunters skip past on their way to glassing knobs and gearless, and that's forage. Not just plants in general, but what mule deer actually eat in the wild. Because if you're serious about chasing big bucks in the West, whether it's velvet archery season, the mid-October rifle grind, or late season snow stalking, you have to know what they're feeding on, where it grows, and when it matters most. Mule deer aren't like elk. They're not grazers. They're not herd animals that pour into open meadows to feed in plain sight. Mule deer are selective, elusive, and they're adapted to live in incredibly harsh, dry, and variable terrain. And the more you understand their feeding behavior, nutritional needs, and plant preferences, the more you'll stop wasting time in dead country and start zoning in on the places where mature bucks feel comfortable enough to live, feed, and grow old. That means fewer empty glassing sessions, more, oh yeah, this is it moments, and a much higher chance of turning up the kind of buck that doesn't just survive, but thrives under pressure. In this episode, we'll break it all down. How mule deer diet shifts across the 4 seasons, what specific plants and shrubs they seek in different elevations and regions, how nutrition affects antler growth, fawn survival, and buck behavior, and how you can use all this to scout smarter and hunt with more confidence. We'll also look at how invasive species, urban sprawl, cattle grazing, and human interference are shaping mule deer diets and what that means for us as hunters trying to adapt. Let's get after it. Seasonal diet shifts for mule deer: spring, summer, fall, winter. To understand mule deer, you've got to think like a survivor. These animals don't live easy lives. They're built to endure harsh winters, dry summers, and everything in between. Their diet shifts dramatically with the seasons because what's available and what their bodies need changes just as much. So if you're planning your next hunt or trying to make sense of where the deer went, this is where to start. What are they eating now? Spring, April through June, is focused on recovery and rebuilding. Spring is the season of the rebound. Coming out of winter, mule deer are often in rough shape. Their body fat's low, their muscle tone's down, and fawns are developing inside of does. Bucks are laying the foundation for antler growth. Their main goal: protein, nutrients, soft green growth. In Wyoming and Montana, look for early green up in foothills and lower elevations, especially sagebrush flats where spring forbs start popping up. In Idaho and western Colorado, the same thing happens in south-facing hillsides and open benches. Key spring forage includes desert parsley, milkwedge, spring ephemerals, and like phlox and arrowleaf balsam root, tender sage tips, early snowberry and serviceberry leaves. As these plants emerge, does gravitate towards high nutrition zones to support fawn development. Bucks follow the same trend, laying the groundwork for healthy velvet growth. In summer, July through August, antler growth and body maintenance become the focus. Summer forage is abundant, but mule deer still don't eat everything in sight like elk do a lot of times. They're more selective browsers, focusing on plants with the best combination of protein, minerals, and digestibility. This is peak antler growth season for bucks and lactation season for does. Their needs are high and they'll travel for quality food. Look for mountain mahogany, chokecherry and serviceberry shrubs, snowberry and currant bushes, lupin, fireweed, and other protein-rich forbs. In high country basins across Idaho and Colorado, you'll see velvet bucks feeding in the mornings and evenings, and they're going to feed on these lush plant communities, but they'll spend midday in shaded timber or brush pockets, not wide open meadows. If you're hunting velvet bucks, summer forage will tell you where the bachelor groups bed, feed, and stage their transitions. If you find the right food source at 8 to 10,000 feet, you're in the zone. Now for fall, which is going to be September to October for us, we're there in transition mode. Fall is when things start shifting fast. As temperatures drop and daylight shortens, high elevation forage begins to dry out. Bucks and does both start feeding more heavily in preparation for rut and winter. But again, they don't just drop down to the first grassy flat they see. Mule deer begin keying in on shrubs and browse, including bitterbrush, especially in Wyoming and Idaho, cliff rose and antelope brush, mountain mahogany, snowberry, serviceberry, and even young aspen suckers. This is also when acorns and mash crops become important in southern Colorado or mixed oak zones. During archery or early rifle seasons, these fall transition foods often dictate daily patterns. If you can find a brushy bench just below alpine timberlines with good cliff rose or serviceberry, you'll find movement even in daylight. Now during the winter months, let's say November through March, deer are in survival mode. This is where mule deer become true survivors. In Wyoming and Montana especially, harsh winters push deer into wind-blown ridges, open south slopes, and anywhere they can find exposed shrubs and dried browse. They're no longer chasing protein. They're conserving energy, minimizing movement, and relying on foods that are digestible and a lot of times whatever's available. Key winter foods include bitterbrush and sagebrush, cliff rose, rabbit brush and greasewood in drier zones, twigs and buds from deciduous shrubs and trees. And if those food sources are buried or absent, mule deer suffer. Fawn survival drops. Bucks burn off all their fall gains, and herds start shifting to lower elevation, winter range, often dangerously close to roads, developments, and more predators. In the late season, hunters should focus on isolated pockets of exposed bitterbrush, rimrock benches that get windswept, and any wintering zones that retain some sunlight and shelter. Where you find the food, that's where the deer are going to be. Let's do a seasonal diet recap real quick for you. If you want to make some notes here, mule deer are constantly adjusting their diet to meet the land and their biology. They're not freeloaders, they're not foragers. They know exactly what they need and when. And if you can follow the seasonal forage curve, you'll understand where they go and why they're there, and what moves them from one place to another. In the next section, we'll get more specific with the plants they prefer by region and elevation, and how that can help you glass up more deer faster. Mule deer might be widespread across the West, but they're not eating the same thing in every drainage, every state, or even every elevation band. Their diet shifts based not just on the season, but on what grows where they are. And if you want to scout more effectively, pick better glassing spots, and actually locate deer instead of just hiking to hunt, you've got to learn the plants that matter most in each region. Let's break it down by elevation first, then by regional emphasis across Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, and Colorado. High elevation, 8,000 to 11,000 feet, this is going to be your classic summer and early fall range, especially for velvet bucks. In these high country zones, mule deer key in on lupin and fireweed, alpine bistort, false dandelion and paintbrush, serviceberry and snowberry shrubs, young aspen growth, willow shoots, and forbs along streams. These are typically protein-rich plants and support antler growth, lactation for does, and overall summer body conditioning. Now, tip for hunters, high elevation feed zones with ample snowberry and forbs near bedding cover are gold for early season velvet hunts. Now let's talk about your mid-elevation, 6,000 to 8,000 feet. This is where most transition and mid-season hunts take place. Your key forage in this band of elevation includes bitterbrush, a mule deer staple. It grows on dry slopes and it's essential for fall through early winter. Cliff rose. It's found in rocky, broken terrain in Utah, Colorado, and southern Idaho, and it's preferred in the fall and winter browsing. Mount mahogany, a top-tier forage across Montana, Idaho, and Colorado. It usually grows on ridges and rocky benches. Chokecherry and serviceberry. They are especially browsed in the fall when leaves begin to dry out. Snowberry offers protein and growth in patches that also serve as bedding zones. Now, if you're hunting the October rifle winter, you want to look for brushy benches with a mix of bitterbrush and Mount mahogany. The big bucks often hang close to feed during the daylight hours. Your lower elevation is going to be, let's say, 3,500 to 6,000 feet. This is classic wintering ground for late season glassing country. Key food sources are probably going to include sagebrush, one of the most important plants for mule deer in Wyoming and Montana during harsh winters. Rabbit brush and greasewood, common in drier parts of Idaho and also Colorado's western slope. Four-wing saltbrush, it's a nutrient-rich shrub common in dry, arid zones. You've got your winter fat and snowberry found on open hills and sunny slopes. In tough winters, deer will stay low and lean on those shrubs for survival, sometimes digging through snow to get to them. Now, when glassing winter range, target wind-blown ridges or south-facing slopes where bitterbrush and sage are going to be exposed. Tracks and trails will tell you where the deer are feeding. Let's talk about some regional highlights and plant preferences by state. Let's zoom in on state-specific forage patterns. While there's overlap, each state has its own unique balance of terrain and vegetation. In Wyoming, bitterbrush and sagebrush dominate large portions of the state, especially from the Red Desert to the Bighorns. Serviceberry and Mount mahogany are commonly found in those transition elevations. Aspen growth and forbs in the western mountain ranges support summer antler growth. Your focus should be bitterbrush. That equals big bucks. Look for areas where sagebrush flats meet rimrock or brushy transitions. In Montana, sagebrush and snowberry cover huge swaths of the state. Chokecherry and Mount mahogany also thrive in the western drainages. Winter fat and rabbit brush again come into play in eastern Montana's arid zones. Montana bucks love broken terrain with a mix of sage, brush, and cover. Key in on snowberry pockets for mid-season bedding and feed combos. In Idaho, it's shrubbier than it looks, especially in southern and central units. Bitterbrush, cliff rose, and Mount mahogany make up primary forage. High country zones feature chokecherry, lupin, fireweed, and snowberry. Your focus should be looking for south-facing avalanche shoots and burns with regrowth. Idaho's brushy benches often hold deer year-round. And in Colorado, serviceberry, oak brush, and Mount mahogany dominate the mid-zones. Cliff rose and chokecherry grow in rocky foothills and on plateaus. Aspen regeneration is key for summer and fall bedding. Your focus in Colorado, its best forage, it often grows near cover and escape terrain. Focus on burn edges, cliffy benches, and oak and snowberry transitions. The bottom line here, mule deer are opportunists, but they're not generalists like elk. They know what they want and where it grows. So when you're building a hunt plan or looking at maps, don't just think about elevation or proximity to water. You want to ask what specific shrubs grow here. Is this bench rich in bitterbrush or just a sage flat? Are there transition zones with serviceberry or mahogany? That level of detail is what separates hunters who hope to find deer from those who glass up those 170-inch bucks and make it happen. Let's talk about nutritional needs and antler growth. If you've ever wondered why some bucks look like they belong in a calendar photo and others seem to stall out around 140 every year, it's not just genetics and pressure. Oftentimes it comes down to nutrition. What mule deer eat and when directly affects their antler size, body condition, survival rates, and rut performance. And while they're survivors by nature, their ability to grow, thrive, and reproduce all comes down to what's available in the landscape and what they can actually digest and convert into energy. Let's break it down by season and purpose, starting with antler cycle. Your antler growth in late spring through the summer. Mule deer bucks begin growing new antlers shortly after shedding in early spring, usually around April. The initial growth is driven by increasing daylight, the photo period, and surges in testosterone and insulin like growth factors. But just because antlers start growing doesn't mean they'll reach full potential. To build mass, tine length, and overall structure, bucks are going to need high protein forbs, shrubs with digestible fiber and minerals, and consistent access to moisture-rich plants. Studies show mule deer bucks prioritize quality over quantity. They'll range further or move higher for nutrient-dense feed rather than simply stuffing themselves on whatever's low-quality food's available. In the mountain zones of Colorado and Idaho, that might mean daily routines that include feeding on alpine lupin, snowberry, or aspen shoots. In more arid places like Wyoming and eastern Montana, it could mean targeting bitterbrush and Mount Mahogany, where moisture pockets keep growth going. You want to look at mineral content, especially calcium and phosphorus. It is critical. While deer don't seek out salt licks as aggressively as elk, they do benefit from natural mineral-rich soils and the plants that grow in them. Now, during late summer, we're focused on body condition and rut prep. As bucks approach the end of velvet in August and early September, their nutritional needs focus shifts slightly. They begin bulking for the rut. That means increasing that caloric intake, right? More calories, more food, switching to more fibrous and carbohydrate heavy plants, targeting browse that helps put on fat and going to help them maintain energy levels. Does also begin preparing to support fawns through weaning and recovery, so herd-wide forage competition can increase. At this point, protein is still important, but energy balance becomes king. That's why you'll see more mule deer feeding on Mount Mahogany, bitterbrush, and cliff rose this time of year. They're prepping for the gauntlet of rut activity and, for bucks, the coming drop in feed intake once they go full rut mode. Now, during post-rut and winter, again, mule deer are in survival mode. After the rut, the bucks are depleted. They've dropped weight, they're worn out, and in most regions, winter is coming fast. Their nutritional needs change. Now, it's about energy conservation, digestion, and efficiency, and minimizing effort. They rely on bitterbrush and sage, high in digestible fiber, even if lower in protein. Snowberry and serviceberry twigs available even under light snow. Low movement feeding zones, think windswept ridges and south slopes. During this period, mule deer reduce movement drastically and begin working into established winter ranges. The stronger the feed in those zones, the higher the overall winter survival rate is going to be, and the better the spring rebound. Here's a fun fact for you. Bucks with more fat going into winter also tend to rebound faster in the spring. Makes sense. And they grow bigger antlers the following year, which means your future success as a hunter is being shaped by last year's winter survival and this year's forage quality. Why does that matter? Well, too many hunters look at antlers and assume it's just luck or low pressure that lets bucks grow big. And while that's a factor, the real story is written in the landscape. Did that buck have access to protein-rich forage during June? Was there enough bitterbrush and serviceberry in fall to help him prep for winter? Did drought push him into marginal terrain where forage quality was low? If you understand how antlers grow, what nutrition supports that growth, and where the nutrition exists, you can start anticipating which zones hold the real giants, and you'll stop wasting time in areas that simply don't have the forage to support mature bucks. Let's talk about how mule deer feeding behavior versus elk can differ. If you've hunted both elk and mule deer, you already know they play by different rules. But when it comes to feeding behavior, the difference is also night and day. Understanding how mule deer feed, not just what they eat, can completely change how you scout, glass, and ultimately hunt these animals. And if you go in with an elk mindset, you'll miss mule deer more often than you see them. You just won't be in the right area. Let's break down the biggest differences. Elk are grazers, mule deer are browsers. Elk feed like cattle. They graze across the landscape in herds, moving through grass, sedges, and forbs with very little selectivity. Their large rumens and aggressive feeding allow them to digest a wider variety of forage and in bigger quantities. Mule deer, total opposite. Mule deer are selective browsers. They feed on twigs, shrubs, buds, and high nutrient forbs, but in small calculated bites. Their digestive systems are built to extract the most value from low volume, high quality foods. Why does this matter for us as hunters? Well, mule deer won't be out in the open grazing across a meadow like an elk. Even though you see them in the open, that's not the same objective. They'll be tucked into brush lines, feeding slowly and deliberately. If you're not glassing into the cover or watching those finger zones, those fringe zones where bitter brush meets slope, you'll miss them entirely. Elk often feed in bulk, mule deer feed in bouts, because elk need to consume large amounts of forage to sustain their mass. They often feed for long, uninterrupted periods, and especially during mornings and evenings. Mule deer, on the other hand, feed in shorter bouts. They'll rise from their beds, nibble selectively for 20 to 40 minutes, and then bed again, often within 100, 200 yards of their whole feeding zone. This creates predictable micro movements throughout the day. If you're still hunting or setting up to glass, don't expect mule deer to come pouring out of the timber at golden hour. Instead, you want to look for brief feeding windows, especially mid-morning and late afternoon, on slopes with the right feed mix. Big bucks might move only a few steps from their bed to feed, then vanish again. Now, elk don't mind pressure quite as much as mule deer. Mule deer absolutely do. Elk can be pushed and still behave relatively predictably. They might run to the next basin, rebed, and feed in more open areas if they feel safe. Mule deer, especially mature bucks, will shut down under pressure. Their feeding becomes more nocturnal, more cautious, and more tied to cover. They'll choose suboptimal forage if it gives them a better survival edge. Now, when pressure is high, start focusing on secondary feeding areas, brushy pockets, abandoned timber cuts, or small patches of snowberry or mahogany that don't look like much on a map. These overlooked food sources can be key to killing a buck when everyone else is hunting prime feed areas. Now, elk follow feed. Mule deer try to live in it. Elk migrate, shift elevation, and adjust ranges significantly based on large-scale food availability. They'll follow green up in the spring, rut zones in September, and winter ranges in deep snow. Mule deer have a much tighter home range, often built around reliable year-round food sources. Mature bucks might live in the same 2 square mile area for years, especially if it contains the right mix of seasonal forage, bedding, cover, and escape terrain. If you locate a big buck during summer or pre-rut, odds are he'll be close by come hunting season, especially in regions like western Wyoming, southern Montana, and central Idaho. Learn the core forage zones in that country, and you're not just scouting deer, you're building a playbook that can last for years. The bottom line here is mule deer don't wander as much. They don't expose themselves as easily, and they don't feed like elk. They're methodical, selective, and wired for survival. And once you start tracking their feeding patterns, not just locations, you'll begin to see the hidden patterns a lot of hunters miss. Where do they feed undisturbed? What time of day do they move within their zone? How does the available forage shift with the weather and pressure? Those are the questions that lead to big mule deer. Let's talk about some glassing and scouting tips based on the food forage. Here's where all this knowledge pays off. You've got the seasonal diet shifts dialed in. You know what plants mule deer prefer in your region. You understand how they feed differently than elk. Now it's time to put that into action through the glass and boots on the ground. Because when you pair solid optics with forage knowledge, you stop just looking for deer and start identifying habitat and habitat pockets that consistently hold bucks, even when the pressure's on. Let's start with food, not just terrain. Most guys start e-scouting with elevation bands, slope angle, or travel corridors. And that's not bad, they're important. But here's a better approach. Start by identifying forage zones first. Use satellite imagery and vegetation overlays to locate brushy benches, south-facing slopes with sage, mahogany, or cliff rows, timberline ridges that might hold serviceberry or snowberry patches. Even on dry years, these zones often hold better feed and better bucks than textbook mule deer country. Now, here's a pro tip. Tools like OnX and Go Hunt can help you layer habitat data and public land access. But your best friend is high-resolution satellite imagery. Look for color variation that signals healthy vegetation in the summer and early fall. Make sure that you're glassing with a forage-first mindset. When you get behind the glass, don't just pan the hills randomly. Think like a mule deer. Ask yourself, if I were a 6-year-old buck, where could I feed unseen? What slope has both quality browse and an escape cover? Where's the closest cliff rows or snowberry within 100 yards of timber? By narrowing your focus to these pockets, you increase the odds of spotting that one mature buck that slips through everyone else's glass. Look for movement in the shadows. Mule deer often feed in cover and only step into partial light for short bouts. Instead of scanning open hillsides, work slowly through those edge habitats and transition zones where bedding and feeding meet. Time your effort based on the forage. The type of forage available directly influences when and how mule deer move. Early season, August through September, target high elevation basins with lush forbs and alpine browse. Glass north and east facing slopes where plants retain moisture longer. In the mid-season, late September through October, bucks start shifting to mid-elevation mahogany and bitterbrush zones. Evening movement increases and they'll even just feed inside of cover. During late season, November and December, focus on wind-blown ridges and south-facing sage flats with exposed browse. Deer will feed low and bed high in cold weather to conserve energy. Knowing what mule deer eat during each phase helps you time your glassing to maximize visibility and pattern their routines. Here are a few boots on the ground forage clues. When you're out scouting, pay attention to what's been browsed. Nip twigs on bitterbrush and cliff rows. That's a favorite late season sign. Forbs with missing tops in alpine basins, summer bucks have been there. Droppings near snowberry or mahogany stands, you've likely found a bedding feeding overlap zone. Mule deer don't leave giant rubs or wallows like elk all the time, but they do leave behind patterns in the plants themselves. If you can read the forage sign, you'll build patterns that hold year after year. Try to use forage to predict pressure response. When pressure pushes mule deer into harder to glass zones, a lot of hunters give up. But here's the trick. If you know which secondary forage sources they rely on, stuff like snowberry and drainages or isolated cliff rose patches near rock slides, you can stay one step ahead. You're not just chasing mule deer, you're waiting where they still need to feed. That's how mature bucks get killed. Let's talk about the impact of grazing pressure, urbanization, and even invasive species. As mule deer habitat changes, so does the forage. And as the forage changes, so does the behavior and success of hunters trying to pattern mature bucks. If you're not factoring in the long-term shifts happening on the landscape, things like cattle grazing, expanding neighborhoods, or noxious weed invasions, you're missing the bigger picture, because forage quality isn't just about plant types. It's about how mule deer access those plants in a world that's constantly shifting around them. Let's start with livestock. Cattle grazing is a reality across the West. Across public lands. It doesn't mean you can't find deer in those areas, but grazing changes everything when it comes to forage quality. Heavy late summer grazing can strip landscapes of the exact forbs and shrubs bucks rely on during the velvet growth and pre-rut bulking. It can also trample and damage tender shoots that deer prefer. It can push mule deer out of traditional feeding zones and reduce diversity of palatable plants, forcing deer into less optimal areas. In regions like southern Wyoming or central Idaho, overgrazed basins may look like prime habitat on a map, but in reality, they're functionally dead zones. Now, here's what you can do as a hunter. You want to scout for undergrazed pockets. Look for areas fenced off from cattle, terrain too steep for cows to access, or canyons with isolated browse, untouched by livestock. These forage refuges often hold the best deer, even if they're just a quarter mile from a beaten path. Next up, let's talk about people. Expanding towns, rural subdivisions, highways, recreational corridors with ATVs, those all chip away at mule deer habitat. But they also push deer into strange patterns. Oftentimes you're going to find bucks bedding in hidden draws behind pivots on the edge of town, crossing roads to access the last remaining patches of cliff rose or serviceberry. These urban edge deer often live hyper-localized lives, relying on small slivers of cover and forage surrounded by human development. Don't write off these fringe zones, especially in late season. Mule deer often tolerate more proximity to humans than you'd think if the forage is dependable and the pressure is minimal. Scouting private-public land boundaries, permission-based hunts, or limited entry units near development can open the door to overlooked bucks on edge habitat. The West is also fighting a slow battle against invasive species, and mule deer are feeling it. A few of the major problems include cheatgrass. It grows fast and it dominates space, but offers almost no nutrition. It displaces the native forbs and grasses. Thistle, knapweed, and mustard species, they spread aggressively in disturbed soil and burned areas. Again, it's poor forage for mule deer. Your juniper and pinyon encroachment, a lot of times these can crowd out sage and browse plants, reducing open feeding ground. In areas once rich with bitterbrush or mountain mahogany, you may now find monocultures of useless vegetation. A once productive mule deer basin can become a biological desert in just a few years. If you're hunting based on old intel or outdated e-scouting assumptions, you could be wasting your entire season. Looking at that from an aerial view doesn't tell you the whole story. You've got to be a student of plant life. Learn to recognize early successional forage versus invasive overtake. Scout regenerating burns that are in year 3 to 7 post-fire, when native forbs and shrubs are at peak nutrition. Better yet, track regional land management efforts. Many wildlife agencies and conservation groups are actively restoring mule deer habitat. That includes removing invasive juniper, reseeding forbs, and rotating grazing access. Get ahead of the herd by identifying restoration zones with improved feed and scout them before the masses catch on. Now, everything we've covered, from browse preferences to pressure impact, is all connected by one theme. If the forage declines, mule deer disappear. And if you don't adjust your scouting, glassing, and strategy around those shifts, you're hunting ghosts. But if you can identify the pockets where quality forage still exists, the bucks will be there. Whether it's a remote alpine basin, a regenerating burn, or a sage flat tucked behind private land fence, the deer will find the feed. Your job is to find the feed first. Now, if you're still here, still digging deep with me into what makes mule deer tick, then you're the kind of hunter Team Backbone was built for. This isn't just about being outdoors, it's about living relentless, studying the details, preparing with intention, and pushing yourself to hunt harder and smarter every single season. Team Backbone is where that mindset lives. When you join, you're stepping into a community of hunters who train for the mountains, think critically about strategy, and don't wait around for tags to dictate their preparation. You're going to get 20% off site-wide at backboneunlimited.com, a member-exclusive t-shirt mailed every month, not available anywhere else, full access to the Team Backbone Digital Vault with mindset training, fitness plans, strategy guides, checklists, and more. A private group where I'm personally answering questions and helping you break through barriers. Direct text, email, and phone access to me for training advice, gear help, or just real talk from someone who's walked the same path. Entry into our monthly giveaways. This is for the off-season grinders, the DIY public land guys, the ones who want to outwork their excuses and outlast the pressure. And if you sign up early, you'll get our founding member t-shirt, limited to the first 100 members, never printed again. No extra steps, you'll receive it automatically when you join. You can learn more and sign up at backboneunlimited.com. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.